welcome to the Diversity Rocks podcast. It's brought to you by Orange Orchid, and here at Orange Orchid, our mission is that we are striving for everybody at work and in society to feel like they belong. We also like to disrupt the system. My name's Liz Critchley. I am today wearing a blue roll neck jumper, a woolly jumper because we're in England and it's cold. I've got shoulder length blonde hair with a fringe. And I haven't got my glasses on today, so I can't really see anything very clearly, but never mind. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Mark Anderson. Hi, Mark.
Hi.
Hi. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name's Mark Anderson. For the audio, a white man with dark hair and a beard. I'm wearing glasses today, so I can see. I'm a sales consultant for a software sales company. My background is I'm 58 now, and I have ADHD, borderline personality disorder, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic in recovery. I haven't had any alcohol or drugs for 12 years, going on 13 now.
Amazing. Well done. Well done. And tell us, if you don't mind, a little bit more about those three elements of your life.
Sure. They're all very intermingled, is the first thing to say. I suffered from a lot of depression when I was younger too. I was born in Hull, but moved around the world with my parents, who were in the Royal Air Force. So a lot of movement, a lot of instability early on. That probably influenced my mental makeup and personality, however you want to put it. I really wasn't aware that I had ADHD, borderline personality disorder, and I certainly wasn't an alcoholic when I was younger. But all of those things were probably influenced by the way that I grew up. Certainly sort of in counselling and in the research that I've done myself, that's quite common among people with no kind of fixed culture of their own, that live within a family culture or a working culture, but not their own. Constant movement. And my alcoholism probably stems from the borderline personality disorder. I had great difficulty controlling my emotions. I had a great deal of fear, a great deal of wrong-sized emotions that are common to people with BPD. I had a great deal of, I reported depression. I was misdiagnosed as having bipolar, all sorts of things as I started to present to doctors, and always heavily drinking during that time. The alcoholism, it's a progressive illness. I think I've probably always had it. My mother is an alcoholic. Sadly, she died of her alcoholism when I was in my 40s. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's quite common for it to pass through families like that. So there was always some background of that. The borderline personality disorder, looking back, I think my mother probably had that too. Mm-hmm. So I went into life with those things going on: borderline personality disorder and alcoholism. Now, when I got into recovery, stopped drinking, got some help, joined Alcoholics Anonymous, had detoxes at various sort of rehab clinics and things like that, managed to stop drinking. I was able to separate my mental health issues from the alcoholism. Because I always wondered whether it was alcoholism that made me depressed or depression made me an alcoholic. So I separated the two, discovered that I still had some mental health issues, started to investigate those, and that's where I met a counsellor who engaged with me over manic depression initially, but immediately diagnosed me as having borderline personality disorder and ADHD. Now, ADHD had not been mentioned to me at all earlier on, but within the first few counselling sessions, the way he put it to me, he says, "Mark, I would bet my house on you having ADHD.
Wow, okay.
You display all of the elements that I associate with it." And we went through the diagnosis procedure. I went with it separately through the NHS to get that diagnosis. And those things have been present with me all the way through my life. It certainly affected me from my teenage years onwards, I would say, and I built lots and lots of ways to cope with all of those things. But where I am today at 58, looking back, I've got a great deal of sadness around the fact that had I known earlier, I think I would have made different choices, certainly would have behaved in a different way, and would have sought the kind of allowances and accommodations that would have made my life a lot easier.
Yeah.
And a lot happier.
Mark, for those that don't know, what are the traits or characteristics of the personality disorder and the ADHD? Because I'm guessing there are some that overlap and are similar, and some that are different. How would it be displayed to us, and what does it feel like for you?
Borderline personality disorder, the defining characteristics really are an inability to regulate your emotions and to keep them right sized. So you'll feel extremes, often confused as manic depression, because you see these things. But things that would upset you will upset me enormously. Abandonment issues are often present amongst people with borderline personality disorder as well. And it means that sort of slight criticisms or slight hurt me enormously. If I'm contradicted, criticized, or attacked in any way, I have a very negative reaction to it. And those are really common amongst people with borderline personality disorder. There's quite a bit of manic behavior in BPD as well. Again, it's often misdiagnosed because of that. So you will find me, or before I took steps to manage it properly, either extremely passive and unengaged, or extremely hyper, and my behavior went through rhythms of that, very up and down, inconsistent, difficult to be around, I think. Very, very terrible problems maintaining relationships, friendships, relationships. I've divorced twice. Really, really difficult around that. And ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's a confusing name, I think, because I'm attention deficit. I'm able to concentrate and focus really heavily. It's maintaining my focus on the right things that is difficult for me, or engaging with the right things at the right time that is difficult for me. The hyperactivity side of things, I think a lot of people associate ADHD with those badly behaved children at school. Particularly badly behaved boys, although girls are starting to get diagnosed properly now. So those bad kids in school, because that's external hyperactivity. Mine's internal. So I have a racing brain. I have an internal dialogue that gets joined by 3, 4, or 5 other internal dialogues at any one time. All voices, some my own, some other people's. It's not intrusive thoughts. It's just there's a lot going on. So I'll have several scenarios running all at the same time. Don't seem to be able to slow those down.
And that must be exhausting for you, having all of that going on.
It really is.
What would that look like to an external observer then? You've got all that going on. What would that look like to us?
Well, I mask it incredibly well. So I'm told. So I learned when I was very young, sort of teenage years, that actually telling people about what was going on in my head, or displaying it externally, sort of through the way that I act, invited really negative reactions. You're crazy. You're mental. You're strange. That kind of stuff. So I just stopped. I'm actually, I think if you ask people to describe me, I'm probably the opposite of that. I seem really calm. I seem really focused. And actually, internally, it's the swan thing. I might look calm on the outside, but inside I'm racing away like crazy. And so, but I often, people that have got to know me well see that there is a disconnect between me inside and outside. And they struggle to understand why somebody who's intelligent, as capable I, makes these frequent mistakes, frequent lapses of focus and concentration, frequent disengagement, or procrastination. Some of these things that are common amongst people with ADHD are definitely common in me, but I mask so well that it's always a surprise to people when these things come up.
And tell me, if you don't mind, about your diagnosis and the process that you went through, because you mentioned the NHS. There's a lot in the news at the moment about very long waiting times just to get an initial appointment. There's at the moment much more press, much more talk, particularly about autism and ADHD. And I just wondered whether you experienced some of those delays, and whether you thought, because you were adult diagnosed by the sounds of it, whether that had an impact.
It was only 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I was in counselling with somebody talking about my problems with addiction and borderline personality disorder. He encouraged me to approach my GP. My GP, again, very open, and again agreed almost immediately that I had ADHD. She said, okay, now the waiting list, and this is 3 years ago, the waiting list for me to get you into an NHS diagnosis is 3 years.
Wow.
So what she did was introduce me to a right to choose scheme, which meant I was able to go to an independent private clinic and get them to run the diagnosis. I still had to wait a year to get into that program. They then did the assessment, gave me the diagnosis, which meant that it can now hand me back to the NHS.
Okay.
And the NHS can treat me. And now I'm waiting for treatment. I was very nervous about treatment because it's medication, it's drugs.
Okay, yeah.
But I've heard incredible things about treatment as well. Again, a bit of sadness around this, but I know too, there's lots of people with ADHD in Alcoholics Anonymous.
Okay.
I think that if there was a Venn diagram between alcoholics and ADHD, the middle bit would be about 50%.
Really? Wow.
It's enormous. It's enormous, the crossover. And I know two people that are in treatment, the alcoholics that are in treatment for ADHD, and the drugs have made an immense difference to them, but the waiting times are long.
And you're still waiting for that, are you?
Yes, so I'm waiting to get that treatment. So it's back to the NHS and the waiting list there. And I've heard that there are shortages of the drugs now.
Oh, gosh, goodness. And that must be, I mean, it's frustrating, the waiting process. But like you say, you know, taking medication for that sort of condition must be quite worrying, or you'd be apprehensive because, you know, it sounds like you've been through quite a journey to get to where you are, and it sounds like you have some mechanisms in place, or at least now the self-awareness of what might be going on, you know, to then take medication. You must be quite apprehensive about what impact that's going to have.
I am apprehensive. Because I'm an addict, I'm quite anti-medication, anti-drugs anyway. I took antidepressants for many years. In fact, I've only just been weaned off those. Because if I want to engage with ADHD medication, I need to be clear with antidepressants.
Okay.
Did that?
I've not heard that before.
But I should probably get off antidepressants anyway because of the length of time that I've been on them. So yes, there are two things there. The waiting increases anxiety. There's no two ways about it. I felt quite sort of vilified when I got the diagnosis. And then there's another way for treatment. Now, treatment isn't just medication, but they're going to put me back into the sort of talking therapies and counselling that I've already engaged with. I think they can do much more. And you're right. I've made a lot of adjustments already. And what's really encouraging is that the rest of the world seems to be ready to make those accommodations now.
That's good to hear.
Where I am now, a company called Recite Me, who make accessibility software, I discussed my ADHD at interview with them. Not only did that not discourage them, but they immediately said, what accommodations do we need to make for you to make it possible for you to work here? Straight away, you know, without me asking for it, they were ready to do that. So I have 2 days at home. So I've got a hybrid working thing, 2 days at home, 3 days in the office, which works brilliantly for me. I've got the facility to go to quiet space in the offices as well, as noise distractions. When you've already got 5 guys screaming in your head, other noises are not helpful. So that's going on too. And mental health days are a real thing where I'm employed. It's not just lip service. If felt as if I needed a day away from the office to restore myself, I'm allowed to do that.
That's great. That sounds really progressive. And I guess what
That
you would hope
certainly
from
wouldn't
a,
have been the case 20 years ago
yeah,
when I first started working, experiencing depression and anxiety. Absolutely no accommodations made for that at all.
no.
In fact, it was sneered at, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think mental health was so badly understood that people thought you were swinging the lead or being a bit soft.
Yeah, and I think there's still an element of that today. You know, most of my career, I've worked in HR. And I guess as a profession, we've always been acutely aware of trying to keep up to date with, you know, our knowledge of different conditions, and probably are a bit further ahead than perhaps other departments, and been trying to talk to managers about mental health. And I wonder, you know, you're very open in discussing this. I know we'd had a discussion previously when we caught up, and you were very open about talking about your conditions. And I wonder whether, has that always been the case, or was there a moment where you thought, no, you know, I just wonder what's your thinking behind, because some people are very private, aren't they? And they don't want to talk about it, and they're worried, you know, from a job perspective, they're worried if they say something that will be detrimental to them, or they might not get the job. And I wonder what's different with yourself that makes you a lot more open about it.
Well, I think in my early career, when I was a younger person, I kept the mental health issues I'd had, the depression, the anxiety, what I now know was the borderline personality disorder. I kept that completely secret.
Okay.
Absolutely no way was anyone going to know that, because I'd seen the prejudice that had been deployed elsewhere on other people. Mm-hmm. You know, people that missed promotions or were not hired or promoted in any way because they'd declared some mental health issues. So I kept that very quiet. My alcoholism, I functioned really well in my career as an alcoholic for quite a long time. When I got into recovery and realized just what a huge achievement that had been to stop drinking and get into recovery, I decided that I wanted to be really open about it. For a start, being in recovery is a lot more positive message than being an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You know, so two very different things. I'm very open about the fact that I have been an active alcoholic, and now I'm a sober alcoholic in recovery.
Yeah,
that's a really positive message. I put it on my CV. I put it on my CV as in recovery, and I talk about the charities that I support for people in recovery.
Yeah,
that's a really positive message. Really common in America. It's where it is seen as a very, very positive thing. There's been some research done that says that you want to be neighbors with and you want to employ people in recovery because they tend to be very positive, helpful people, mm-hmm. keen to get on, keen to live a better life. So I'm great about that. The ADHD thing, I don't know whether, again, I would have declared that earlier. I've been encouraged to declare it because of recent sort of expansion of awareness around mm-hmm. autism and ADHD. I think people are willing to accept that there are positive sides to ADHD. I'm afraid I don't buy it's a superpower thing. Mm-hmm. If it is a superpower, you can have it back. It's there are some upsides, but by and large, I'd rather not have ADHD. But I think people are a bit more accepting of it now. Interestingly, I've got a close friend who has ADHD and autism. He will talk about ADHD, but not autism.
Okay.
He feels that there is still a lot of prejudice against autistic people. Mm-hmm. People don't understand. I think they imagine the kind of Rain Man situation for all autistic people.
Yeah. And it was a great film, but it didn't help, did it? It didn't help the image and the perception of autism.
It's a spectrum, you know. Course, he's great at masking as well. So I could tell he was autism because of my background. He was autistic because of my background, but actually he's quite good at masking it. Yeah. So there you go. Sort of different people and different parts of the spectrum. You'd be. I think it's still not easy to talk about.
No, and it's so you mentioned something then that just reminded me. I'm fascinated by the descriptions. So ADHD has the word disorder in it.
Borderline personality disorder.
And I know there's kind of a wave or a change of thinking now being discussed about moving away from the medicalization and calling it a disorder and talking about traits or maybe conditions. And I've spoken to quite a few, in particular, autistic and ADHD people and asked their views on it. And I get a real mix in terms of, as a society, we just need to accept that people's brains work differently. And let's not talk about it as a disorder. Let's just learn how we can, understand each other and create systems and processes that work for everyone. And then I've had other people say, it absolutely is a disorder. It has such a negative impact on my life. To not call it a disorder would be insulting to me, because it has such a negative impact. And I wondered whether you had a particular view on that.
Well, at least it isn't described as an illness anymore. And alcoholism is still described as an illness. I understand why, but I believe that's a disorder as well. I don't mind the word disorder, but actually I consider it to be a difference rather than a disorder. I really do. In line with what you've just said, I think the way that my mind is wired is just different to yours. I don't think it's disordered. It's different. Given how complex human beings are and our brains are in particular, is it any surprise that some of them vary? And I think that difference comes from childhood onwards. We're born with largely the same brains, but those connections and forms and ways of using the brain seem to be different. There does seem to be some genetic, I've read widely on this, there does seem to be some genetic links, but there's also a great deal of environmental influence on how we develop as human beings.
So that whole nature-nurture.
Yeah, and it's unsurprisingly, as with any other debate on nature-nurture, it seems to be a combination of the two. My daughters, who are 27 and 21 now, have ADHD.
Okay.
One was diagnosed while she was at university. The other hasn't been diagnosed, but she doesn't really mind that she doesn't have a diagnosis. She has ADHD. She's a teacher, so very capable person, but has it too, and doesn't consider it to be a disorder either.
No, wow, that's interesting. And certainly a lot of the reading I've done do talk about it being hereditary, and a lot of adults get diagnosed because they're taking their children through some sort of, process and kind of suddenly realize,
having ADHD parents, there's a 50% chance that you'll have ADHD too.
They're quite a strong.
And both of my kids' parents are alcoholics. We don't know whether their mother has ADHD, but I would guess so too. Because of the crossover with it. So and again though, their experience has been very different to mine. Katie presented at university saying, I'm having problems with this, that, and the other. Engaged with mental health services there, and quick as a flash, they just said, we're going to assess you for ADHD because a lot of the things that you're reporting suggest that you have that. Do your parents have ADHD? Yes. Okay, step this way. Got her a diagnosis quick as you like.
Wow.
And have made all sorts of allowances for her in her academic work to make sure that she gets through it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I've got so many questions. I'm going to go to one that's been buzzing around my mind since we've been talking. In terms of, you describe yourself in the present tense as an alcoholic, a recovering alcoholic. And I wonder what the logic is with that as opposed to I was an alcoholic, because that struck me as you've obviously been sober for a good number of years, which is fantastic, but you still describe yourself as an alcoholic.
My friends say, are you still going to AA? Why? You're not an alcoholic anymore. I am an alcoholic. Alcoholism isn't something that goes away. I'm just an alcoholic that doesn't drink. What I've learned in recovery is that my alcoholism has got very little to do with alcohol. It's a mental and psychological condition that is triggered by alcohol. And obviously, I also had alcohol dependence, where I was dependent on alcohol. I couldn't not drink. I would have seizures and things if I did. That could be treated and cured very quickly. 5 days in a detox unit in a hospital and you've got no alcohol. You're no longer alcohol dependent. But alcoholism, that mental and physical and spiritual sort of reliance on something outside yourself, stays with you forever. And so I need to keep taking treatment in peer groups like Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm constantly treating that condition. And I choose to say I'm an alcoholic today because it supports that. It supports that recovery.
Yeah.
I do know alcoholics that will say I'm no longer an alcoholic.
Yeah.
That's their
Personal
choice.
choice.
But I've come across dozens of accounts of alcoholics that have one friend of mine in particular, 20 years without a drink, 20 years sober, visiting AA on a weekly basis, drifted away, and then for some reason decided to have a pint with his mates when he was playing golf. After years and years of not doing that, and it was fine, and he had a pint the next week and the next week. But 9 months later, he's drinking vodka behind the wheel of his car again.
Oh, gosh.
Because it's there. It's just there. It's waiting for you. So I say I'm an alcoholic, and it reminds me that I need to stay clear of alcohol.
Stay there, yeah. Oh, that's interesting. Thank you for sharing that. If we can talk about work for a second, it sounds like you work for a brilliant, inclusive organisation. I wonder whether there's any advice you've got for either employers or employees that perhaps are not in such supportive environments in terms of things that might help or how to approach that conversation.
But I'm really interested in this area. And mental health first aider, the company I work for now, as you say, is really supportive. We're just setting up a forum that is going to make where I work a positive space for people in recovery as well. When things weren't like this, I think the best advice I would give to somebody who wants to introduce this to their employers is start talking to your employers about the positive nature of diverse workforce. If you have a group of people that are diverse in terms of gender, ability, intellect, and neurodiversity, you'll have a more productive workforce, a happier workforce that will get more done. The boss is going to listen for that rather than it's just a nice thing to do. Speak to their interests. Why should I support people with neurodiversity? Well, because they're going to work harder for you, and they have skills that can't be found elsewhere.
Yeah. And I dare say most of the adjustments are not massively expensive things to do. Very often, I guess they're around flexibility about work times, locations, where people are sat in offices, for the noise, like you mentioned earlier.
There doesn't need to be any financial implication at all. It's just some operational stuff. You might need to make some spaces or, as you say, move things around a little bit. Be flexible on start times and finish times and create quiet space. Those types of things. It's easy to do. And as an individual, I would just encourage people to talk to their employer about that. Yeah.
And is there anything, as we kind of move towards the end of our discussion, so very, very much part of my mission is disrupting the system. I think we do, we focus too much on how we can change an individual to fit in, as opposed to, well, how can we disrupt and change the system to make sure that everybody feels like they belong without having to adjust their own style or personality or mask. And I wonder whether, from your experience, you've got any ideas on how we all might be able to do that, to just disrupt that system a little bit more, to be a bit more inclusive.
I think education and information is really important. If we can talk about these things more openly, I think that will help everybody. My boss beside me is neurodiverse himself. He's got a cartoon on his wall of a school building with a ramp and some steps outside it. And there's some people waiting to go in. One's in a wheelchair and there's 4 or 5 others waiting to go in. And they're asking the janitor to clear the steps first because there's more of us waiting to go in with the steps. Yeah. And the guy in the wheelchair says, well, why don't you do this ramp first? We can all use the ramp.
Yeah.
And just encouraging people that sort of generally making a place a better place for everybody is a good idea. If you make it better for me as ADHD, you'll be making it better for everybody, not just me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so true. I've seen the same picture. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really powerful.
It is a powerful image, isn't it? Yeah. I like it too.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. I have one more question. So Mark and I were talking before the call about our love of music because I spotted Jimi Hendrix on Mark's wall, and the paintings behind me are prints that Bob Dylan did. So I have a fascination with inclusivity and the arts, creative arts, music, poetry, spoken word, film creation. Uh, Random question: do you see a link? Do you think, kind of creative arts helps?
Artists are all crazy. I've got two really good examples of the links between the two. I run a community interest company called Artists in Recovery.
Okay.
And that came about because I'm sat in a cafe with 6 of my friends, all neurodiverse, all addicts, all artists. And we said, have you noticed how many artists are neurodiverse? And we could all reel it off. So we set up this kit that now sort of helps neurodiverse artists to exhibit their work and things like
Amazing.
that. So
I love that.
My daughter, the ADHD who got diagnosed at university, plays bass guitar in a band that's touring at the moment.
Okay. And, now you got to name the band. Give them a bit of promo.
Tom A. Smith. Look out for him. He's a singer-songwriter. She's in the band. And again, she's telling me that that the musician friends that she's in a circle with, there's a great deal of neurodiversity among them.
Yeah.
I think neurodiverse people are particularly creative.
Yes.
That there seems to be evidence to support that. I'm not just saying it because I want to be seen as a delightfully creative person. That my circle suggests that it's true.
Yeah.
And music and art, there does seem to be some there. And that creativity definitely extends into sort of drier working areas as well. I'm seen as I might be crap at project management because I can't organize anything, but my creativity is really valued because I'll suggest different ways of doing things that help the situation because I can see it from the different perspectives.
It's fascinating. I have a real passion for music and for art, and I just think it brings people together. Whether people like the same thing or don't like, and get passionate about what they do or don't like. I think it's a great leveler, isn't it, in terms of kind of bringing people together. So okay, I'm going to wrap us up there, Mark. I can't thank you enough for coming on to the podcast and for being so open. I think it's really refreshing, and I know for a fact that it will really help a lot of people out there who listen to this, just in terms of your openness, and I'm sure they'll relate to that, and hopefully it inspires them to go on and do great things. I wish you all the best. I know we'll talk again really soon, but thank you so much for your time.
No problems, Liz. Thank you for giving me the space to talk about these things. I am passionate about removing the stigma of alcoholism and neurodiversity. So it's been a great opportunity.
Great. That's you're very welcome. Speak soon.